Hey everybody, I hope you're having a good day. So, I'm going to continue on my little family story here, but this one is kind of just some kind of crazy situations that we got into as a kid. I had to write some notes down because I can't always remember it all at once, and it's never in chronological order because the way that it comes back to my memory. Some of it is stuff that I've blocked out, and some of it is just stuff that other things have overridden because it's also been insane. So I'm just going to kind of go down my little list here. When I was a kid, my parents fought a lot. And we're not talking just verbal arguments. These were big, drawn out, I'm going to kill you arguments. And they would hit each other with cars or frying pans or tools or I remember my mom trying to stab my dad with deer antlers once. I mean, that's just kind of the weird things that they did. But one particular instance, they were having a big drawn out argument, and they were, of course, were on the road to separation. I'm going this way, you're going that way. And they couldn't decide who got to take what. So my dad got out his chainsaw and proceeded to cut up all the furniture in half. TVs, tables, couches, chairs, beds, you name it, it was cut in half. That was his solution, was to cut everything in half so that way it was equal. So that's the example that we got when we were kids. My parents had a lot of get like rich quick schemes, and it always resulted in me especially, and sometimes my middle brother, being sent to sell things. So one of the little schemes went on for years, and it was my mom making these pine cone wreaths. So what you'd do is her and my dad would load us up in the car, and they'd give us these big black garbage bags, the giant ones for yard waste, and have us go out into the forest and pick up pine cones, really big ones. Um, just we would do this for days, all day long, for weeks. It would go on. When she finally had enough, she would assemble us in the garage or the house or wherever and have us start putting these wreaths together. That would include using a drill, hot glue guns, wire, whatever, decorating them, assembling them. And when they were finally assembled and she thought she had enough, she would they would load us up in the car and take us around to kind of wealthy neighborhoods and have us go door to door selling these wreaths to people at Christmas time. And if we didn't sell enough or weren't successful enough, of course, it was our fault. That's just kind of the way that it went. My mom also did this with chocolate, with candy. She had a number of candy stores. She was a good cook and a very good confectioner. She was a good baker, and she really was talented in that department, but she didn't use it in the right way. The first store that they had, I believe my aunt burned it down for insurance money. And then the second one that I can remember was when we lived in Montana for the second time when I was 7, 8 years old. But later on, she started making it from home. And so she would make all this candy at home and again, assemble my brother and I in the car. Usually it was me because I was the oldest and I was able to, really grasp the what they were telling me. So I would have to go to these neighborhoods again, knock on doors, and sell this chocolate that she had made door to door. These are what my days consisted of when I was little, and they would keep us out of school to do this, all day, all night, all weekend, whatever, for months at a time. They would go to random churches on Sundays and just have me go in there with a basket of this candy that she made and try to sell it to the people that were at church. They would drop us off at my aunt and uncle's. My uncle was a preacher, and have us go to church with them and try to sell the stuff that they made. That was our job. And my brother didn't usually go with that one because it was too much for them to take us both. So they would just take me because they had two girls and it was easier for all three of the girls to kind of get together. But they kind of used them in a way to get me to go and sell candy at my aunt and uncle's church. So that was one of their little things. When I was younger, I used to call myself my dad's firstborn son because Everything that a son would normally do with their father back then, my dad did with me. I was the oldest. I was the one that was capable of doing things that he needed. So that's fishing, hunting, fixing cars, doing, labor and chopping wood and things like that. That's what I would do with him. My first hunting trip, I think I was 4 years old with him. And that was in Eastern Washington, bird hunting. But he would take me to the lake with his friends to go ice fishing. And my job was to watch the poles in the water. I'd just sit there and watch while they drank. Now, this is single digit weather, if not negative degree weather. Very, very cold. I did not own a snow coat. I did not own anything like that, or snow boots or anything. It was just normal tennis shoes and a sweater or whatever. They just didn't know how to dress children to stay warm. One time I fell on the ice and I went under. Now, my dad and his friends managed to pull me up and get me out of the water, but the solution to that was not to rush me home to make sure I didn't get hypothermia and die. It was to send me to the truck to sit there with the truck off, no heat or anything like that, until they were finished. So this is hours of me freezing on the verge of hypothermia, sitting in this freezing cold truck until they were done doing whatever they were doing. One time the truck fell in the ice and the truck sunk to the bottom of the lake. And that was the last time they went ice fishing. But these are the kinds of things that they would do. I mean, there was no protection or thought that there was a danger to children or to make sure that they didn't get sick and die and things like that. I mean, it was just bizarre. When we got the chicken pox, I think I was almost 7 and my brother was right around 5, something like that. Their solution to that was to drop us off at a friend's house. Now, this friend had children and family, but she agreed to watch us. She just didn't want us around her family. So she locked us in the basement. And it was for 10 days. She locked us in the basement for 10 days. And there was no bathroom down there, so she had us wear diapers. And my parents didn't come back for 10 days. She just locked us down there and she brought us down food and whatnot and, changed diapers and stuff like that. But she did not want us around her children. So she locked us in the basement, which is just crazy. When I was 7 years old, I remember trying, I'll back up. My parents have always been heavy smokers. My dad's always been a heavy drinker. So in Montana, it was legal for children to buy their parents cigarettes. So my parents would send me down to the store to buy their cigarettes and their alcohol and bring it back. And one time they left me alone with my brother, of course, for a while, and they came back and I had tried one of their cigarettes. I got the biggest beating that day, and it wasn't because it was bad for me, it was because it was theirs. And they made me smoke a whole pack of cigarettes that day, and I don't remember ever being sicker. I was so sick. It was awful. But that was their solution. And it wasn't to punish me and make me realize that smoking was bad. It was because it was theirs and I touched it. That was just their solution to things. So they constantly did that kind of stuff. I mean, they used to drive us around town with dollar food stamps and have us go in the store, buy a penny piece of candy and give them the 99 cents change so that they could get their cigarettes and their alcohol. It was just crazy. I'm looking at this little piece of note that I have here. They would have us, like if their car broke down, they would have us stand outside hitchhiking while they sat in the car because they thought that having kids do it would have better results if children did it. Now, we were always, my little brother, things were different when he was born because he was the baby and they had a different feeling towards him. So they didn't subject him to these type of things. It was mainly me for the most part because I was the oldest. My little brother was in on some of it, but not as much as I did. We were exposed to all kinds of different dangerous situations. I mean, they didn't care or they didn't know. I don't know which one. I think both. It was really bizarre. But I remember being in a bicycle, and I was in one of those like toddler seats. My mom was going down this really fast hill, and there was no guards on the chains or gears or anything back then, and so I managed to get my foot stuck in the gears, and my mom crashed, and that was my fault. Back then it was all my fault. I was severely disciplined for that situation. We were in motels a lot, and they would put, tin cans with the lid sticking out in these garbage cans. And two times that I can remember, I stepped on a garbage bag with the tin can lid. And the first time it cut the bottom of my toes all the way to the bone. And the second time it cut the bottom of my foot. Now, my parents were really reluctant to take us to hospitals because then they'd have to explain situations. But, their solution to something was to put a sock on it or an ace bandage. I jumped off a bunk bed once and landed on the screen to a window. The corner took a big chunk out of my thigh, and they wrapped an ace bandage around it until they thought it would stop bleeding, but it didn't. And they finally had to take me to the hospital. But we would get seriously coached on not to talk, so that they wouldn't, find out what was going on. Back then hospitals didn't communicate. We were always moving, always at a different address. They would keep us out of school for a really long time so that, nobody would find out what they were doing. I always had stitches or broken bones or casts or something. I remember I got strep throat once, and my mom wouldn't let them give me any medication for it, no antibiotics. And I was sick for over a month with this really high fever. And I know that I've had vaccinations now, but I don't know if I ever had them when I was younger. I don't have any record of it. So she was just really weird about it. She didn't want anybody giving us medication. She didn't want us exposed to other people and learning about certain things that they weren't doing. They just, I don't know. When it comes to food, they were really weird about food. So my parents had their own stash of food. They bought good food for themselves, but for the kids, no. We had our food that we drank. I, to this day, despise powdered milk. I won't touch it. I don't like the smell of it. I don't like the taste of it. It's gross. My dad would try to hide it by putting it in like milk jugs, and I can smell it from a mile away. I hate it. It is the worst thing on the planet. I will not touch powdered milk. It was just what they got from the churches, was powdered milk. But they kept their own little stash of food. They often had a little refrigerator in their room, and that's where they'd keep their sweets and their soda and their food. But for us, my dad would make this big pot of like navy bean soup, and we'd have to eat it for a week, if not longer. Now, I don't know if I'm now immune to things because of that, or if I've got some sort of like, I don't know, disease within from it. I don't know. I can't figure it out. I'm sure they exposed me to things that were pretty gross, but they didn't care because, the kids will eat rancid meat, no problem. I hate things like that now. Any sort of navy bean soup or pinto bean soup or anything I won't touch it because it's gross. As kids, we would put gallons of ketchup in it to try to make it taste better. After a few days, it just got to be really disgusting. Now, when I was 11 years old, we lived in this big judge's house in Longview, Washington. I don't know how they got into this house, but they did. And it had this big metal spiral staircase to the basement. There had to have been 2 cellars full of food that had to have been from the original owners of the 1800s. This stuff in these jars were disgusting. It was black. We're talking botulism in a jar. Now, my dad would pull it up from the basement of the cellar of that house and try to make us eat it. That was his thing, was to get us to eat that food. And we would rather starve. We would just go hungry instead of eating things like that. But they'd sit there with their Oreos and their Coke or whatever, and it's just bad people. It was just, I could never imagine doing that to my children. They would use our names constantly for electric bills and phone companies and things like that. And When I turned 18, I had so much debt that I couldn't even fathom the numbers. Um, when I moved out, they started using my little brother's name, but they would say that I did it to try to cause, to try to put it on me. And so, to this day, he still says that I used his name for cable companies and phone bills and things like that, which I never would have done, nor would I have ever had access to his information. But they carelessly used our names for insurance scams and checking accounts and whatever they wanted so that they could just skip out on it. Uh, it's really weird. One time when I was in my mid 20s, they had this big yacht, and they fixed it up using my grandmother's money that they stole, and they wanted to sell it. So they took a $20,000 deposit from a man and then turned around and sold it to another person for full price. It didn't refund the $20,000. It was a retainer. Uh, the man eventually sued the whole family. I got served with papers one day saying I was being sued for $20,000 of debt that they had racked up with this other person. And I know that he tried to sue my aunt as well. So that's the type of stuff that they did, and they flat out deny it. If you would ask them about it, they'd just go, "No, that couldn't happen. You're lying." Even if you showed them paperwork, they'd still deny it. That was their truth, was that it didn't happen and that it didn't affect anyone. Now, I can't figure out if they knew that it was a lie, that it was happening, or if they really convinced themselves that it couldn't be possible. I don't know. I really don't know. It's hard to figure out. I know nowadays my father is a major coward. Um, he will use a person just like he did us, use us, use us, use us, and then one day just vanish, knowing that he wronged us, knowing that he rather lied or stole or something. And he's a big coward. He'll run from it. And that's the same thing they did when we were little. Um, my mom and dad were always talking about hurting each other. When I was a teenager, when we finally moved to Washington for the last time, I remember being in the kitchen and my mom opening up her coat, and she pulled out this big ice pick with a handle, this big ice pick. And she said, "The next time your father touches me, I'm going to kill him with this ice pick." And she did. She kept it in her coat for months. Um, my dad would have a baseball bat saying he was going to I'm going to bash your mother's head in with this next time she yells at me. My mom would sit at the table and talk about poisoning him. And that was just her random discussion, was to talk about poisoning. Um, they would have us hitchhike. I mean, who has their 7-year-old hitchhike on the side of a snowy road with the car stuck in the ditch? Who has their 7-year-old hitchhiking? Just like when they put the signs on us to get food and money at rest areas. They didn't care what kind of danger we were in. As long as they were getting what they needed, and their plans were being followed through, they didn't care what happened. Now, my little brother's different. He was protected. They somehow formed a bond with him. I don't know what it was or still is, but he was never subjected to those sorts of things. So he doesn't know what that is. They were always really violent, and they were violent with other people. But one of the things my mom started doing later on is she started saying she was psychic. So that was another one of their little schemes, was to get us to go and find people that they could use for their little psychic scam. Later on in life, my mom started saying that she was an Indian shaman and that she did Reiki healing and that she could read people's animal spirits. She made money off of this. She would literally find people that she could read their spirits and give them kind of a fortune reading, which it's just... Now, these things can be real. I mean, there are people out there that really do this, are very successful with Reiki healing and things like that, but my mother was not real. She made these things up. She was a good pretender. She was a good actor. She was a good liar. And she could pretend to go through these things and pretend to be sincere with people. And they would believe her. She was so good at it. She could cry at the drop of a hat and just make you believe that she felt empathy for you. But she was just using you. That's what she did. She used people. It's very, very weird. It's like her using my children's emotions to get to me. She didn't care that she was causing them a traumatic memory as long as it was hurting me eventually or getting back some sort of revenge on me. But these are the types of weird things that they did when we were kids. I mean, I can't tell you how many broken bones and stitches and things like that I had. And it took a really long time to kind of get out of that cycle. And as we got older, they weren't able to kind of manipulate us like that anymore. So their solution was to use our names and social security numbers and things like that. To this day, I cannot count the amount of aliases either one of them has. They have so many, it's hard to keep track. The insurance scams, the get rich quick schemes. My mom, she made a teepee game once and turned it into she tried to patent it and everything. And they just put all this effort into these weird things that they thought were going to make all this money. And they always ended up losing. It was always a losing battle. You know, they would get their little instant gratification. You know, it's like when I was a teenager, I think I was 13. My mom drove to the grocery store and she got in a car accident with someone and it was her fault. And so when the police were called and the police came, she told them I was driving, that I had gotten behind the wheel, even though there were eyewitnesses that said she was driving. She tried to convince them that it was me. And they knew she was lying, but she had convinced herself that I had been the driver. I don't know how she managed to convince herself of these things, but only a sociopath or psychopath can do that. Have no remorse. There was absolutely no remorse. Now, she could pretend that she had remorse. She was very good at that, pretending to have remorse or feelings for people or be on a noble cause. But there was no real remorse there. There was no genuine feeling there. She would always try to take on other people's children or other people's problems and try to make them her own as if she was on this passionate, mission. But she wasn't. It was a selfish mission of just what she wanted in life and how it would affect her, what she could get out of it. She started breeding golden retrievers for a while and would use them. I mean, they would charge incredible amounts of money for them, but also she would give them to people and let them get attached and then take them back. Just really strange things. But as I'm looking over my little list here, I think I've kind of covered most of it that I've written down. The one thing, my mom, whenever they'd get in an argument, my mom would go isolate. She would hide in a car or in a closet or in a basement or something to get attention. She'd go on a hunger strike and a water strike, and she would hide in isolation for attention. She wanted people at that door begging her to come out. And my dad would be walking around the house packing up his things and pretending that he was moving out. And this was their cycle for about 7 days. And then things would go back to normal for about a week or two. And then they do the exact same thing over and over and over again. And it never seemed to stop. It was this vicious cycle of dysfunction and criminal activity and neglect. It's just what they did. So bizarre. Trying to think if there was anything else, but I'm sure there will be lots and lots more. In the next one, I'm going to pick up more about how my mom kind of morphed into this Indian chief's daughter and went on a life mission to kidnap my children. That was her mission when she got older. But I will see you guys in the next one. I hope you have a great day. It's about to snow even more here, so I gotta go prepare. It's getting a little bit cold in here, but we're kind of stuck until it stops. So we're supposed to have a good 2 weeks of this. So I hope you guys are all staying warm and safe and all that good stuff. Bye.